Hello, everyone, and welcome to the midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the education assistant here at the Arboretum, and today we are in Asian Valley because it is nice and shady here, and it is proximal to a gate, which leads to our nursery because we have a program today. We've got our director, Mark Weathington. He's going to show off his top plant picks, and secretly, there is a rare plant auction going on at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum presently, and some of his picks may or may not be featured in that rare plant auction. You may want to load up on knowledge about these plants and then go load your shopping cart with these plants. Place your bids, bid on them, and get them because they are going to be some exciting, rare, and interesting plants. So it should be a beautiful program. Those of you joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I will pass things over to Mark to show off his top plant picks.
All right. This is always such an easy topic for me because I love everything. So, so I just grabbed a few things. I was told by one of the other staff that they've been doing like 5 top plant picks. And I was like, amateurs.
Right? That's not enough.
That would be pretty impossible. As Blake mentioned, if you're joining us live, we do have a rare plant auction going on right now. It'll finish up on Saturday afternoon, Saturday, June 8th, but you can bid now. Go in there. You can go to our website and get that link, or I'm sure somebody on staff is probably putting it in the chat. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the plants that are going to be in this auction that are my favorites. There may be a few of these plants that I have bids on. In fact, I may let you know, I may not, but don't let that hold you back on terms of your bidding. The first one I'm going to go to is this plant, kind of a weird thing. This is a fig, not our edible fig, but a ficus nonetheless from India, Ficus palmata, and this is one that's gotten the name Icebox, and that's really because it is has been so cold hardy. We don't expect many things from India to grow here for us, but this has been growing happily in the area for years and years. We've had it at the Arboretum for many years, planted out. It does produce figs. They're small. They are edible. But you're really growing this for the foliage. It becomes a large shrub. For us, it dies back every year, but it can grow back in a season to about 6 feet by 6 feet, maybe even a little bit larger. The leaves get enormous, 12 inches or more across. It grows to this multi-stemmed, beautiful thing. And then it dies back pretty much every winter. Now, I've seen this not far from here, down in South Carolina, where it had not died back for a couple of years, and it was about 12 feet tall. And it just, in terms of that texture, that kind of tropical look, is really, really hard to beat. If you don't want it to get that tall, you can cut it during the growing season. But this is one of those plants that, you can really push. Once it starts growing, you keep it watered out in full sun, put some fertilizer on it, you can really get it to be just absolutely massive, huge leaves. A lot of fun with this plant. I really like it. And for those of you who like kind of that tropical look, it's hard to beat that. We're going to jump all over the world because there's great plants everywhere. The next plant, this little evergreen plant, looks like a little shrub maybe. This is actually a hydrangea. This is a hydrangea from Mexico, believe it or not. Didn't know there were hydrangeas in Mexico, perhaps. There are hydrangeas all the way down through Central America. And most of those hydrangeas that grow through that area, including this one, are climbing hydrangeas. So we know our climbing, the Chinese climbing hydrangea. This is a Mexican one, and it's evergreen. Now, in the country, there had been some pretty frost tender forms of this that didn't grow very well for us. Also, some evergreen ones from Asia that were a little bit tender. This particular one, Hydrangea seemannii, and this clone is one that we got from University of British Columbia. Actually, we got it because a plant expert in Japan asked me if I could get it for him. So I got seed for him, plus grew some out for us. I planted some small seedlings out at my house on a couple of pine trees in my woodland garden. And they have been fine all through 3-4 winters now as little plants that are getting going. This is a nice chunky plant. Plant this by a wall, by a tree, and they usually take a couple of years before they really start growing up and gripping onto the tree, but it will grow up that tree. One of the more interesting things about it, hydrangea are a plant that deer absolutely love, but maybe because of these thick leathery leaves, maybe because deer don't like Mexican food, whatever, they do not touch this in my garden. Gets those big climbing hydrangea lace cap flowers on it eventually, but really spectacular plant, an evergreen vine. Love that. Feel free to put any questions in the chat, and Blake will break in and let me know if I need to answer something. All right, I was talking about getting that seed for a friend in Japan. Well, I just got back from Japan a week ago. I was out visiting nurseries and visiting plantsmen, and every time I go to Japan to the nurseries, it seems like there's a new hot plant. Sometimes easy to see why it's a hot plant, sometimes a little more esoteric. Go look up Coptis sometimes, Coptis. That is a hot plant right now in Japan for whatever reason. Various species of Coptis. I have not yet been bitten by Coptis fever, but my traveling companions certainly have. But another plant that is having its moment in the sun is this species, Cirsium japonica. Now, you may have heard of the genus Cirsium. Cirsium is thistle. This is a thistle. Sometimes people think of thistles as weeds. Dennis Carey, who wrote the description for this in our plant auction, called it a weed. I perhaps disagree. This weed came from my own garden, so I was ahead of the Japanese apparently, although I got it from Japan. This is Cirsium japonicum, Shirou-fuurin Fu, which just means white margined plant. It's got a white margin around the leaves. I've been growing this plant for about 5 years, and in fact, this particular plant is a division from the plant in my garden. It is generally considered a biennial, so it grows 1 year, makes a great rosette, and then puts up a flower stalk, flowers, set seed, and the whole plant dies. Well, the flower stalk gets so not quite 30 inches tall and is floppy. And when it starts to flower, the basal rosette starts dying out and kind of looking shabby. And I don't think the flower is very pretty. It's kind of a pale pink thistly flower. So what I do is I cut the flower stalk off as soon as it's bothering me, cut it down low, and that rosette generally won't die, but it'll also offset new rosettes there. And so you get it kind of spreading and making more rosettes. And you don't have to worry about it being a biennial. And that's how I would recommend growing it, because it makes this little evergreen, that rosette is like this evergreen starfish of green edged in white with these kind of spiny leaves. And I haven't had anything munching on it. So, the rabbits and the deer have stayed away at that point. You can let it flower. You can collect seed. It will not come back variegated, almost certainly. This is what's called a chimeral variegation, and it generally will not come back true from seed. So if you let it go to flower, you may lose the whole thing. Or at least don't let it go to flower for the first couple of years until you have multiple rosettes, and then one or two can flower and die out. Now, this may or may not be one that I'm bidding on, even though it came from my garden, because I divided it, brought a couple into the Arboretum, and my parent plant died after that because I tend not to be very careful with my plants. So there's no reason you can't overbid me. I did bring in two, so we do have one more in the nursery that maybe I can get a division off of if somebody bids over me. All right, let's stay in Japan. This is a really exciting plant, I promise. It's one of my favorite groups of plants, and it is one of the main reasons I was in Japan, both to get some more forms of this, but also to speak to one of the foremost experts on these and other Japanese traditional plants. This is Ardisia japonica, sometimes called marlberry, at least in references. I've never yet met somebody who actually called it marlberry, but you know, what can you do? This is one that we actually named here at the Arboretum. There's a plant that came in from Japan without a name and was named here in the U.S. Andre the Giant, because it was taller growing, bigger leaves than any other form that was around. And it really spreads. It's a really good doer. It just is fantastic. So I've been impressed with Andre the Giant as a ground cover, small scale ground cover. Most of the variegated Ardisia japonica really, they can form ground covers, but it takes time. They're really more little clumping plants. But Tim found some sports on Andre the Giant that were variegated. And some of those are a little splashy and not very stable. But there's been one that hopefully this shows up, has kind of a pale green edge to the leaf and then dark green in the center. The leaves are kind of quilted or rippled, textured on there. Gets a little pink flowers that'll be followed by red fruits. And because Andre the Giant grows so large, and this in turn grows large, you can actually see those fruits which hang under the foliage. Now, some people grow this as a potted plant in the house, as a house plant. I grow some of these Ardisias in containers in my garden, but this is a great small-scale variegated ground cover. We named it because it comes from Andre the Giant and is so, you know, nicely variegated and showy. We named it El Luchador. So we're bringing the Mexican and the Spanish in together. But I've been growing this for a while. It has not reverted for me. Every once in a while on these variegated Ardisias, you'll get a shoot that's just plain green. I just pluck that out, and then I'll usually go plant that somewhere else where I need some Ardisia there. But El Luchador, this is the first time we've offered this plant. In fact, we had put this name on it a while back, but it hadn't actually made it from our minds and discussions actually into our database. So when we went to put this in the auction, we actually had to actually put the name officially in our database. So Ardisia japonica, El Luchador, your very first chance to get it. Okay, where are we? What else are we going to do? Let's do this plant. Quite a few of the plants that we have in the auction are wild collected plants. This is one of those, not collected by myself, but collected by Scott McMahon at the Atlanta Botanic Garden. Now, this is a Sorbus, Rowans, mountain ashes, depending on the type. Typically, a Rowan has entire leaves, while a mountain ash has pinnate leaves. I have lusted over these things. In England, you see them, all kinds of species. They usually have orangey red berries, but there are ones with white fruits and ones with pink fruits. And oh my gosh, they're amazing. And they all die for us. They get fire blight. They do not grow. So I was really excited to see this one, which had been growing for almost a decade now at the Atlanta Botanic Garden, their Gainesville campus, Sorbus Kewensis. And I first noted it when I was visiting Scott, kind of in the spring, and it was leafing out, and this thing was screaming red. All the new growth was bright, bright red on it. And then it goes to this beautiful green, has white flowers, and then kind of orange-red fruits. And then it gets good fall color as well. So it's really one of those plants that's great for all through the season. It has held up to heat and humidity, which is the Achilles heel of all the other Sorbus. It has done that so well. Now, I didn't bring it up, but we do have another Sorbus in the auction that we did collect, actually, with Scott, called Sorbus Dunnii, which is very similar to this, except the leaves on the back are just this gorgeous silver color on there. And you want to talk about tough, that Sorbus Dunnii is growing in the Plant Delights Nursery parking lot, and flowered and fruited there, and is just growing magnificently. Okay, going back to, well, another wild collected plant, but this is what year I collected it. Collected this in 2014. I am perhaps one of the few people, I shouldn't make fun of the Coptis people because I love Symplocos. Symplocos stellaris is what this one is. It is, to me, an absolutely gorgeous evergreen shrub. It's got these narrow leaves, which I really like, and it probably can't get this on camera, although our cameraman's pretty darn good. It gets kind of fuzzy. The new growth has fuzzy stems, kind of fuzziness to the backs of the leaves and the new buds. This is a very, just a rooted cutting, but I think this is just a spectacular plant as an evergreen. My plant at home is made kind of a pyramidal plant in a fairly sunny spot. In more shade, it'll be more open, gets little white flowers, gets black fruit. I always like it when it actually is a Symplocos, because when I see a plant that kind of has alternate leaves and is evergreen and kind of has these naked buds, when I see that in the wild, I'm always like, oh, I think that's a Symplocos. And 9 times out of 10, it isn't a Symplocos, but this one is, and I really, really, really like it. We do have a native Symplocos. We call it horse sugar, Symplocos tinctoria, which is a very difficult plant to grow, but has beautiful blueberries. This one has blackberries, so not quite as showy in fruit, but Symplocos stellaris. And that's one you can probably get a bargain on in our auction because nobody knows what it is. And when they do, they usually don't like it. Although, wait till you see the variegated Symplocos chinensis I got in Japan. It's pretty nice. Now we'll jump over to Europe. This is an Erysimum Whitmanii. Erysimums are often known as wallflowers. And that's because they've often seeded into walls around in Britain and Europe. They have a tendency to grow there. Most are kind of central rooted but scrambling plants. This Erysimum Whitmanii is more of a rosette clumping plant. I love the wallflowers. They flower early in the spring. They look beautiful. I grow several Erysimums, very different types than these, and I would not garden without them. They tend to be short-lived, so but they're easy to propagate. So I usually either just stick a few cuttings at home every couple years, when I think they might be starting to go downhill. This Whitmanii, I've never seen an Erysimum that had kind of this rosette. We grew it out from a seed batch from, Anastasia Fatou Botanic Garden, somewhere in the Eastern Bloc. And when it came up, I was like, I've never seen an Erysimum like that. These little rosettes, this fine foliage. We planted some. It went from this little thing to about 4 or 5 times as big, but this same exact look of wavy serrate but soft leaves. It will flower next spring. Should flower with pale yellow spikes of pale yellow flowers. Really pretty. This is probably going to be a short-lived plant. I would, as soon as the flowers finish being showy, I would cut them off. That will help. I haven't grown it before. This is our first year growing this, so I don't know. It's plenty hardy. It will want well-drained soil and sun. But it'll be a fun thing to experiment with. And I would love this thing if it never flowered at all. This little rosette is just gorgeous. Everybody's probably looking at this thing in the background going, what is this bright, shiny thing? This is another Japanese plant. It's the Japanese Illicium anisatum, or anise shrub, or star anise, not the edible star anise. Do not eat the seed pods on this. They are poisonous. Illicium anisatum is the counterpart to our native Illicium floridanum and parviflorum, which we do have a variegated Illicium, I think floridanum in the auction. Is that right?
Let's see.
Blake will check on that for me, but
yeah. It says AL variegated.
Yeah,
and it's Floridanum.
Yeah, Floridanum, Alabama variegated. That's from Hayes Jackson, Alabama. But this is one I've seen in Japan several times. We just have it as white Shirou-fu, which Shirou-fu means scattered spotting across the leaves. So, it's not a real cultivar name. It's just a description. It is heavily variegated, comes out almost pure white, goes to this speckling, and then the older leaves will get more green. And so it's got enough oomph there for photosynthesis, enough green to keep it going. So far, I haven't had to cut out any reversions on there, but you never know. It may. The deer stay away from it like they do most of the Illicium. It's rock solid, cold hardy. Plant it in some shade in full sun, it's going to burn and probably go a little bit greener than this. It really likes being in some shade, but easy to grow. Now, Illicium anisatum, they call it star flower, star bush, or anise shrub. Has little kind of star-ish shaped flowers, kind of waxy petaled. Usually they're white. I haven't seen this one flower, but one weird thing I've seen with variegated Illicium anisatums is almost always the flowers, instead of being pure white, have a pink tinge to them. So I'm looking forward to seeing this one, because most of the other variegates are margins or something like that. So I'm really looking forward to see if the flowers will have that pink tinge to it, and if so, it'll look great against this foliage. All right, another jump to a whole nother continent. Now we're going to New Zealand. Some of these countries have these weird things about them that is hard to understand. One of the things with New Zealand is they have all of these Carex species, sedges, that are, we often call them dead sedges, because even though they're not dead, they look dead. They're tan or coppery colored, and they're beautiful, but to those of us who are expecting green, they look a little bit odd. This is one of those plants, but unlike most, which are kind of mop-headed and larger or stand up, this is a little short thing. This is Carex, I got to get the name right, berggrenii. We have not grown this for long. We got it in 2000 as seed from a German botanic garden, Palmengarten. And it's been growing. It popped up. It's kind of been sitting in the nursery where we've been keeping an eye on it, but not thinking a whole lot about it. Honestly, it's kind of survived on neglect for us. But as it's, Sophia's been potting it up and caring for it, I've started just falling in love with this. We finally planted some out last year. They sailed through the winter, making this little mound, and I thought it was going to be a little clumper, like most of the Carex. But I'm seeing in our pots, we're starting to get a little bit on the outside. So I think this is going to spread and make a nice little low clump, which will be amazing going around rocks or things like that, where it'll just kind of hug those, and maybe in between stepping stones where you're not stepping on the crown of this, but you have those around. I think it's going to be really cool. We think often of sedges as wanting shade. This one is probably going to do better in more sun, and then average to probably dry-ish soils. So I've got it planted in a few spots. We've got it planted here in a few spots. We're still figuring out what it likes. Often New Zealand plants are tricky for us, but this thing seems like it's going to just be a doer. Really like it.
It looks dead when you first look at it, but the more you look at it, the more you see all the different colors in it. There's like purples and bronzes and coppers, and it's just a huge. There's a rainbow in that thing.
It really is. It's one of those things that you have to kind of watch to appreciate. I agree. I agree, but it's so cool.
In it.
We may have to move a couple of them because we thought they were going to stay as just little tiny muffins, in the ground, but it looks like they may spread out a little bit, but
nice.
They're not going to do it fast. So I like that. Going back to Asia, this time to Taiwan again, like the Symplocos. This plant goes all the way back to my first trip to Taiwan, 2008. This is Tricertus ravenii. named for Peter Raven, who'd been director of the Missouri Botanic Garden, was the driving force behind the Flora of China project, Flora of North America. Really, he is one of the absolute singular greats in horticulture around the world, not just American horticulture. When he retired a few years ago, probably more like a decade plus, when he retired, they had to hire 3 people to replace him. This Tricertus ravinii is named for him. It's a toad lily. Toad lilies are shade-loving plants, although we found ravinii growing in more sun than I would expect from a toad lily, more sun than I've seen almost any other toad lily growing. And it really likes more sun. It grows better in more sun. Unlike some of the other species, it has a kind of a thick, almost plasticky textured leaf. So it doesn't have all the same problems with some of the leaf spots we get with some of the fuzzy leaf ones. And then when it flowers, it is, if you know toad lily, it's that very typical plant thing. It's got the 3 petals, got the long stigma that has kind of 3 parts to it. And it's purple with speckles all through the throat. Just a beautiful thing. Sometimes people call them, toad lily's one name, but they call them something like garden orchids or false orchids or something like that, because a lot of times people look at that and think orchid flower.
It's a really unique flower, really strange, not like anything else.
It is, yeah, pretty literally unique. Toad lilies are easy to identify in flower because there's nothing else that looks like it.
Chances are you've not seen one in a garden center because they flower at a time of year when people don't shop. So they're not popular in garden centers, which helps make this even more exciting. Yeah, exactly. I always say one of the times in the shade garden when it goes kind of, there's less color other than green often is late summer going into fall. There's relatively few things that are flowering. Most shade things flower early in the season, while there's still more light as deciduous trees are coming out. These flower late in the season. And really, Triceratops ravinii will start flowering fairly early and keep going, midsummer, and just keep going and going and going. It makes clumps. There are some toad lilies that spread fast, including one of the other Taiwan toad lilies, Triceratops formosana, which really spreads to form big clumps, masses. This clumps up, so it'll get bigger and bigger every year, more flower heads, but it doesn't send rhizomes really running out. Foliage, while the foliage is there, it's kind of lightly speckled with purple on the foliage. It's really nice. It's a little subtle, more subtle than on some other ones, but I think it's fantastic. I can't imagine my shade garden without toad lilies in it. And this is one right for the edge, sun, shade kind of area. So Triceratops ravinii. If you see me looking down, I can see if people are bidding on any of these plants. If you want to double screen it, you can do that. Let's see, where we go. What else do we have? All right. Now, this is one that I only had to go across the country for, to Oregon. You may have heard of the nursery Buckholtz and Buckholtz. They do Japanese maples and a lot of other types of plants. I visited there just before Talon Buckholtz, the owner, retired. Now, he sold it to some friends from North Carolina, the Mr. Maple boys, Matt and Tim Nichols. So we kind of feel like Buckholtz is still in the family. But I did, before that news was public, I did go out to visit Talon, and we were driving around and we were looking at plants, and he was reminiscing about everything and his life in the industry. And we were driving around his Arboretum area, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I said, stop! Because there was a Podocarp, which is a little conifer, mostly from Australia, New Zealand, and some other areas in the southern hemisphere and up into China. But this was obviously one of the southern hemisphere forms, and it's a hybrid. And I love Podocarps. I fell in love with them. I tell people often. In 2007, when we had a 100-year drought, and lots of things were dying, and the Podocarps were doing okay. They were mostly the Chinese ones, not the New Zealand ones, but
whatever. I started collecting them, and I went to New Zealand and thought I was going to find all kinds of cultivars of these Nivalis acutifolius Lawrencii types, these short-needled shrubbier types. And I went there and I found one.
No kidding.
One. That wasn't in the U.S. There's a gold one in the U.S. There's a weeping one in the U.S. There are a couple hybrid named ones, but I was really hoping that there were going to be a bunch. And I found one. So when I was at Buckholtz, I saw this plant, which was relatively low, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, and then 6 or 8 feet wide, and had nice reddish new growth, but was looking clean. And I said, "Wait, what's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's Podocarpus Flame," which I had never heard of. So I immediately said, "Can I get some cuttings, please?" And he, of course, let me have cuttings because that's what us plant people do. We like to share. So now we're sharing it. But so really excited about this. These are one of our original cuttings that's in the auction. We have not planted this out yet. We don't have a plant that's bigger than this yet, but based on its parentage, it should do just fine for us in full sun to light shade and average soil. Who knows? Some of those things on the West Coast stay smaller there than they do for us. So I will not guarantee that this will only be 3 or 4 feet tall, but it'll be a cool plant either way. And these things, if it's going to get bigger than you want, you can shear it. You can make it a cone. You can make it a cube. You can make it a duck. Whatever you want to prune this into, you can do that. We have several podocarps in the auction. I'm pretty excited about some of those as well. All right, now we've got one that's making a return to the Arboretum. This is a Distylium racemosum Guppy. Distyliums were for many, many years, decades, what we call a bioplant, and that is botanical interest only. Nobody is going to be interested in this thing. That's an evergreen plant that has petalless red flowers in late winter, early spring. Nobody will ever want it. And then, lo and behold, about a decade ago, Distylium hit the market. And you had Emerald Heights and Blue Waterfall, Blue Cascade something. Now there's Linebacker and Copper Tone, and there's all these Distylium that are being sold in huge numbers as big landscape plants. Forget about boxwoods, forget about some of these other evergreens. We can plant 5,000 Distylium for you. Well, that's in the last decade. 25 years ago at the Arboretum, we had this plant called Guppy in the lath house. And we tried to move it out in 2010 when we started renovating the lath house, and it died. And we thought, well, we lost a cool plant, but nobody's really going to care because who cares about a Distylium? And our plant in the lath house was 8 or 10 feet tall, was just real nice pyramidal shape, very tight with small leaves. Now, most of the Distylium that are being sold are these really wide spreading things, much coarser texture. And so it struck me a while back that, boy, I sure wish we still had Distylium Guppy because nobody was interested in it 20 years ago, but now people may very well be interested in this Distylium Guppy. And we finally tracked it down and brought it back. We got 2 plants this size, one of which we are auctioning off. We'll keep track of who wins it. And if we kill our other plant, we may ask you for cuttings. But this is going to make just a really handsome evergreen pyramidal plant. Flowers are not terribly showy, but kind of like the Carex, if you stop and appreciate them when they're in flower, it's nice. We are going to be working with nurserymen to try and get this into wider use because they are growing so many Distyliums because they wind up that they're really tough, easy plants for the landscape. We always say people want flowers, 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 but really if you want to sell a gajillion plants, an evergreen is the way to do it. See cherry laurels and boxwoods and other such plants. All right, we'll wait on this guy for a second. Go with a couple of the bigger ones. Okay, one of my favorite groups of plants, the evergreen maples. What? Evergreen maples? I've done a whole talk on them. You can go on YouTube and see a whole talk on these. This is the most reliable of the evergreen maples. This is Acer fabri, Father Faber's maple. Acer fabri has been growing at the Arboretum. It was a decent sized tree when I started here in 2007. So longer than that. And this is either a cutting or a seedling from our old plant. Not sure which. This came to us from a supporter. But Acer fabri makes this beautiful small tree, green stems, green bark, evergreen leaves, showy red flowers. And I do mean that, showy red flowers.
It's true. I noticed it, the one on the corner of the Great Lawn this spring. It's really something.
It is really showy in flower. And maple flowers are some of the best pollinator flowers for early spring before everything else gets going. Maples make up a huge part of pollinators of many of the bees, native and otherwise, diet early in the spring. Most of us don't notice our native red maples and things flowering, but they can actually be kind of nice too. But this is showy. This has actual petals on it as opposed to most maples. And then it's followed by, the little maple fruits, the whirligigs, samaras, if you're a botanist, the little spinners that'll drop. And they start off bright, screaming red against this green foliage. And then we'll go tan as they mature and start to drop off the tree. Awesome plant. I was just at a longtime supporter and member of the Arboretum's house, and he had a whole group of people. He's having a garden party, and he said, "I bet no one knows what this plant is." And he turned to me and he said, "Don't say anything," because it came from the Arboretum. And nobody said, "Is it a viburnum?" No, it's not a viburnum. Is it some kind of ligustrum? Yeah. And finally, we had to tell him it was a maple. I think there were a couple people who did not believe us and thought we didn't know what we were talking about, but we do. This is one of several we grow, but this is the absolute most reliable, hardy, easy one that we grow. Love it. All right. A Loropetalum. Who would have thought I would put this among my favorites?
Isn't this supposed to be a rare and unusual plant auction?
That's right, it is. And Loropetalums are some of the most ubiquitous landscape plants that are out there. Mostly all purple leaf, bright pink flowers. JC was instrumental in introducing them to the U.S. Awesome plants. They're awesome plants. Their ubiquity is what makes them,
But the reason they're ubiquitous is because they're awesome.
They're awesome. Exactly. But so this is the green-leafed, white-flowered variety, which is actually pretty hard to find now. But it is also a cultivar named Shadari. All right. Can I test your Japanese? Do you know Shadari?
I don't know.
All right. I only know Japanese words if they are related to ornamental plants, and Shadari means weeping.
Nice.
So this is a weeping form, and you can see it is weeping. Now, it is not a strict weeper. It won't go straight down. It kind of arches out. So we have this one up by our visitor center where you come over. It's kind of coming down over a wall. We've staked it up some so it goes up and then comes over. We have another weeping form, which is probably the same thing. It was called Tokyo Weeping, but it's probably just Shadari. At our white garden, and that's actually was staked upright as a young plant so that it could cascade over the north entrance to the white garden.
And the effect it makes is awesome, like getting to walk underneath it when it's covered in flowers like that.
Yeah, it really is beautiful, and it's Loropetalum are semi-evergreen. If they're some of those good plants that in a mild winter will be evergreen, but if it gets cold, they'll drop their leaves and so not die. In the spring, it is gets just loads of these white little fringy flowers on there. It's beautiful. This is great if you have a big slope to let it grow down over that. If you have a wall to let it cascade over that. Stake it up and let it go up and cascade over. I love to get a tall pot and plant a weeping plant in there and let it cascade over, and then take it once it gets too big and starts rooting into the ground. Take that and put that in a big hanging basket and put it out in the garden. I've actually got a weeping Japanese maple that is sitting in a pot waiting for me to get a big hanging basket. I've got the spot for where it's going to hang, but I haven't done that yet. But this would be another great plant for doing that with. Loropetalum Shadari. All right. One more little guy. Okay. I have some long-standing obsessions. Akuba. I did not bring any Akuba up here. We have some awesome ones in the auction. I only brought one Ardisia up, which is another long-standing obsession. But one of my newer obsessions are hardy gesneriads, the little African violet relatives. This is one of those that the names keep changing. You can call it what I would have called this for many years, and probably still would because old brain, is a Brigsia speciosa. It's apparently now Oriocaris speciosa. This was a collection by our colleagues at Far Reaches Farms from China. And these little gesneriads, these little hardy Oriocaris and primulinas and things like that, related to African violets, we've passed by for years. They grow on rock faces and cliffs and little rocky edges of the paths where we look at them and say, oh, that's a Brigsia. Now, that's an Oriocaris. That's not hardy. Meanwhile, we're collecting hardy plants all around it. And I don't know why we've done that for years. It seems like all of us people who go collect plants have done that. And now all of a sudden we're going, wait a second, maybe we should look at these other things. And these have wound up being just great garden plants. So this one, Oriocaris speciosa, will have these wiry stems that stick up, and then these really oversized kind of lavender pink flowers. They're about an inch and a half long, and you'll get several of them that dangle over this, and it'll just make a bigger and bigger clump every year, and you'll get more and more of them. Once it gets big enough, you can divide it without much problem. They're easy that way. You just got to give them a few years. We haven't had really any problems keeping these alive. What I suggest to people is plant them in a bright spot in shade, ideally on a slope, or if you have really flat land. What I've found just really, really effective is to have a rock. Doesn't have to be a big rock. It can be like a river stone that's kind of set in the soil, and I'll plant this right by there. So like half of it is actually, the leaves are on that rock. And, they grow on these rocky hillsides for whatever reason. They seem to really appreciate that. Or even I've got one area where I've got just like a low paver wall, and I've got one that's planted right up on that paver wall, like this. And it's been great like that. Average regular water. They're not, they are kind of succulent-y woodland plants. They don't want to, especially when they're getting established, they don't want to go be bone dry. But once they're established, after that first year, they're pretty tough. I don't really do anything with them. And they grow on these rocks that usually have a lot of moisture, a lot of high humidity like us. They'll often have, kind of water that runs down there. But when it gets dry, they're dry, and they kind of will shrivel up a little bit and then, flush back out when the water comes again. So, but you could grow this in a little container inside just as well, but it's just a cute little plant. If you've got a little woodland rockery or a little container outside, I think that would be very cool. I don't have that species, so I may or may not be bidding on that one as well. I know who donated it to us though, so they may be getting a call. Oh, all right. Everything I've shown you so far, except for maybe the first plant, we can ship with our auction. We can ship smaller plants to the lower 48. We don't go to Hawaii or Alaska. without some really, you got to talk to us before we would even consider doing that, and it's expensive, so you may not want to. But there are some larger plants in our auction that you've got to pick up locally. So you can't, we were not going to ship you this plant. So I showed you an evergreen maple. Most of us know there are evergreen oaks. We think, our native live oaks. But there are a lot of Asian evergreen oaks that are just beautiful, beautiful plants. I really like the whole group that are often lumped in as Cyclobalanopsis, and Cyclobalanopsis are all ones that have rings on the little acorn cap. They actually use that as a genus in China often. Instead of Quercus, the oak genus, they'll call them Cyclobalanopsis. Tomato. We use Quercus, but that they're ring-cupped oaks. There are only two that are not widely grown, but sometimes grown. You see grown in the U.S., and that is Quercus mercinifolia and this species, Quercus glauca. Quercus glauca makes kind of a upright oval-headed evergreen tree. It's sometimes called the blue oak because when it's really growing, it's really happy. The foliage will be kind of this dark green, but with this blue tinge to it, especially from a distance and in the sun, and then a little bit lighter on the back sides. But just beautiful habit, and it's great. So that's a rare plant to find, but hey, rare plant auction. This is actually one that gets this. Let's see if I can find a good spot for it. That gets this scattered variegation on it. So it's called Shima Fu. Again, we've gotten, our Cirsium, Shirou Shima Fu. This is Shima Fu, which means white variegated. And it's got this speckled kind of creamy white variegation over it. And it emerges, though, with this beautiful kind of shrimp pink color. Then it'll go to the variegated. And then as it gets older, the green kind of takes over for the variegation. So it's really the younger growth. Now, it'll get to be a good-sized tree, 40 feet tall, 20 feet wide. An ancient Quercus glauca can get much larger than that. What I've been doing a lot in my garden in recent years, and this is a plant I want to do that with, is pruning regularly. I'm not a pruner typically. I let plants go. But I've started, really cutting some plants back hard. And what you find with plants like with this kind of variegation is when you prune hard, the new flushes come out with lots of variegation. And so a tree like this, rather than letting it go, if I were to get in this now, I would take it home and I would start actually shearing it into kind of a pyramidal shape, full all the way to the ground. Maybe I'd let it limb up, but I would do that hard once or twice a year. Give it enough time for the leaves to harden off late summer into fall, but you would get this flush of pink growth a couple times a year instead of just once, and then it would go to really heavily variegated again, and you could see it. Sometimes these variegated trees, when they get tall, it's hard to see a lot of the variegation. So I like the idea of trimming it back, and I do that with some of my other plants and plants that leaf out with purple foliage. I've been cutting them back. I actually cut an Illicium back 3 times a year to keep it looking good, or keep it flushing out new growth. So there you go. That's just a handful. I think right now we have 300 and some plants in our rare plant auction, and we know that our friends plant grandma Mike. So we have about 300 plus plants in our auction right now. We know that our friends are going to be bringing some more to the symposium, the Southeastern Plant Symposium on June 7th and 8th. 7th and 8th, which you can still sign up for the symposium, but you don't have to join the auction. Happy to answer any questions if people have them.
For sure. So first off, Anne wanted to know, how do you transport the plants from Japan and Australia, etc., when you go collecting things?
I do not transport plants. There are ways to actually bring plants, but you have to, it's very specific. You have to go through only certain entry ports where there's USDA inspection stations. at those entry points. So what I do is, you have permits to collect plants and bring them into the U.S. Before you go, you have all those permits set up to bring in whatever plants you're bringing in. You go to the country. If you're buying from nurseries, you just buy from nurseries. If you're collecting in the wild, you work with universities, botanic gardens, the government agencies, whoever it needs to be, to get the permissions and permits to collect in the wild, just like you can't go into our national forests and collect, but you can get permission to collect seed there if you go through the proper channels. So you do that. Then you get the plants inspected in that country, where they go over them with a fine-tooth comb, make sure there's no soil with them, no insects, no diseases, no anything. They make sure that they are on your permit so that they're allowed to go. And then we take those plants with their phytosanitary inspection and our permit, and we ship them to USDA inspection stations. At the inspection stations, they again check to make sure the plants are on our import permit. You can't import something that's not on your permit, and make sure the plants are disease and insect free. And then if all that is true, then they come to us. That's just with the general plants for planting permits. There are various other permits. There's what's called CITES permits, which are the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. So that would cover orchid plants, palm plants, just various endangered species. You have to have a specific permit for that. There are lots of plants that you can't bring in. There are plants that you can only bring in with a permit that you then have to quarantine the plants for 2 years. And you have USDA inspectors who come out on a regular basis and inspect those plants and inspect how you are holding them. And if in those 2 years they show up with a disease, you have to destroy them. And that's by deep burial, which is, you can't do that. You don't dig a hole in the backyard. You got to go to a landfill that does this, or incineration, or there's another 1 or 2 methods that you can do. But they have to give you the okay for those to leave that. And then there's plenty of things you just can't bring in at all. So long answer for a short question.
Fair enough. Is a good answer anyway. So Carolyn says that the Distylium Guppy looks a lot like Sarcococca, and she wants to know, how does it compare?
Oh, it's completely different from Sarcococca. It does look very similar as a young plant, I suppose, but the Sarcococca would be this arching plant, while this is more of a woody shrub that will grow up and be tight. Think of it more as like a wide pyramidal boxwood, as opposed to the Sarcococca.
Cool. So Sue says that she couldn't see the Oreocaris in the auction, and she wants to know if there was another name for it or another number. I spelled it right. It's Oreo like the cookie, and I couldn't find it on the page. But
let's see. We may have it under a different name. So we've got Brigsia rossthornii. That's not it. Yeah, I'd have to. No, it's in there. I sent a picture to Dennis of one. Hold on. I'm going to find it.
He's going to find it, y'all.
I'm going to find it. Ask me another question while I do this.
Okay. How large will the Loropetalum eventually be?
Depends on how high you stake it.
There you go.
No, let me change that. It's not a plant that you stake up to a certain height and then it's all downhill from there, all weeping. It will kind of keep arching up over itself. So if you just were to plant it as is, over time, it would probably mound up 4 or 6 feet if you never touched it, and be, 12 feet wide, because it'd be creeping on the ground. If you stake it up, say 5 or 6 feet over time, it'll probably get up 8 or 10 feet tall and 8 or 10 feet wide. It does tend to want to go in one direction. So if you really wanted it to kind of arch, fountain over in all directions, you probably have to do some pruning and some work on it, because it does seem to always want to go kind of one way.
Yeah, but the one in our white garden is fun to walk underneath, so definitely go check it out in real life if you're looking for inspiration for where to plant that. So Jennifer wants to know if the non-native plants have been screened to make sure that they won't escape outside gardens and displace native plants.
Yes, these are all plants that we have grown for quite a long time. Oh, well, no, I take that back. Some of these are very new plants to us, but all in groups that have been just fine. And there was a comment on Facebook, I think, with somebody who was disappointed that we had fewer natives than we normally do. And I went through fewer U.S. natives, and I went through and we had out of the 350 or so plants in there right now, we had about close to 15% were natives.
Nice.
But it's a rare plant thing, so we're not putting purple coneflower in there. But there are some really rare native plants. In fact, there are some that we're not allowed to ship across state lines because they're federally endangered, which is a whole other thing. You take an endangered plant and say, hey, you can't share it around. It seems silly, because we can make more of those plants. We're not digging them in the wild. So, but yeah, we actually have some really interesting ones, and we have some really cool things coming in. But if you look at there, if you just read names and you're not reading descriptions, you'll say, oh, look, there's a Buddleia. Buddleias are all from Asia. Nope. We have a Texas native Buddleia in there. So you got to go in there and look at those descriptions because there's some really interesting things in there.
For sure. Well, that looks like all of the questions that we have. He's still looking for it. We hope we can find it.
Oh man, maybe I have to add it back in.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's under a different name.
I'm sure we'll figure it out. But thank you so much, Mark, for pulling this presentation together for us today. It was wonderful to see all of these fun plants and learn a little thing or two about them.
It was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today for this presentation. We will be back next week at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. We will be doing bonsai with me. So we look forward to seeing y'all then. Y'all take care.